The second appearance of the morning for James Creedon. James, tell us, what's the world press saying?
Well, let's go to the Brazilian papers first of all. After that disappearance of flight AF447, the front page of Agora, which is a Sao Paulo-based newspaper, has photos of the airports both in Rio and in Paris, showing people obviously waiting for news about the disappearance of that flight. Then in O Globo, which is the biggest paper in Rio de Janeiro, they have a lot of they're updating their website quite regularly at the moment. The main article is about the Brazilian Air Force calling off the main patrol last night as night fell, and those searches are due to continue today once daylight comes around. And radar scans continued overnight, and there are apparently 3 naval vessels on their way to the presumed site of that crash. There's also a timeline on that website going through the critical moments over the last 24 hours. One of those moments being at 8:13 p.m. local time, when orange dots were seen by a pilot of a TAM Airlines flight, and those orange dots were seen in the middle of the Atlantic about 30 minutes after 447 issued a report of electronic breakdown. Now, that information has been confirmed, according to O Globo, by the Brazilian Air Force. However, it must be said that a French search over Senegalese waters after hearing about these orange dots didn't find anything. Now, that's in O Globo. Moving to other newspapers around the world, Süddeutsche Zeitung, a German daily, leads with that story too. Of course, apart from the high numbers of Brazilians and French on that flight, there were 26 Germans on board. So according to the Red Cross, some 11 passengers were due to fly on to Stuttgart. That's what the Süddeutsche Zeitung is saying. The front page of the Shanghai Daily, 8 Chinese were on board that flight, and they discussed the various hypotheses of perhaps a lightning strike, etc. So they are some of the front pages from around the world. Also in The Guardian in the UK, I think the figure of 5 Britons has been mentioned on board that plane. They have an interview with a pilot who is unnamed, and he is saying that while lightning does often hit a plane, lightning alone wouldn't necessarily be the cause behind this. And he says turbulence also is a factor that's being mentioned, but usually you can see that on radar screens. And he says how he has often flown off route by something like 200 kilometers to avoid turbulence. And so he's really saying that it's always multiple factors really that would lead to a crash like this one. Now, also in The Guardian, there's an article titled "Terminal Said Delayed, but the Faces Betrayed the Truth." So they have reporters in Paris and in Rio speaking about the fact that even though this happened in the middle of the night, it wasn't until noon yesterday that people started to figure out that something was amiss. And so it says too that France braced itself for the worst loss of life on an Air France flight in its 75-year history.
Have you been struck by the tone that the papers are taking, by the obviously the photographs very much telling the story of the anguish families are going through?
The photos alone are speaking of the anguish in themselves, and a lot of the papers are talking about these the families coming to the airport, coming in for instance to Charles de Gaulle Airport with their hands over their mouths to that crisis room. Now, one thing that struck me was it's terrible for all of these families concerned, but Rio and Paris are regional hubs, so a lot of people were flying on elsewhere. And what about people whose families that were affected in other countries where there was nowhere to go? You just learned of this news perhaps on the television, and you couldn't go to Charles de Gaulle Airport or the airport in Rio.
29 nationalities in all represented on board that jet.
Right, exactly.
So obviously we mentioned French passengers, Brazilian passengers, German passengers, let's just say some from the UK, but there's Croats, there's someone from Turkey, there's all these countries all affected.
Indeed, I had a look at the Irish Times in my own home country, and there were 3 young Irish women recently qualified from university, and there was a Welsh woman in their party as well. They were on board that flight, so the Irish Times is leading with that. Quick look at the front page of the French papers as well.
Such a tragedy.
Mystery is the word that's appearing on all of the front papers. Mystery
that's the common word in the French papers, isn't it?
Exactly, in Le Parisien and in Le Figaro. So we just don't know what happened, and we'll be waiting, I suppose, to find out more as the news evolves.
Okay, James, thank you for that look at the international papers there. James Creedon,
thanks, man.
Our reviewer of the press. Thank you. Let's catch up with the headlines then.